Wonderful. So without further ado, this is the recording of the mental health and nonprofit needs. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rita, who's going to talk about how we can kind of engage in this space together.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chelsea. So we're here today to be together, and that means we want y'all to be able to engage as well. And we've got a few different ways to do that. We've got Zoom chat, so you can share there if you have questions or concerns that pop up that you want to share or ask the speakers. Please feel free to do that in Zoom, in the Zoom chat. Now, we do realize not everyone's going to want to share something with the whole group, so you can either choose to share it individually with the speakers, or you can use a Slido link, which we will drop into the chat as we get going. But the Slido is anonymous. In other words, like we won't know who is sharing it. However, we also have a link to Slido security protocols if you are concerned, because it does mean that this is all still public. So we want to make sure that you have those two different points of access, chat and Zoom, directly to us or to the whole group if you'd like. And we're going to really quickly practice as we do the transition to the Integral Care team is going to lead us through the next conversation. So we have a question for you, if everyone would like to practice in chat. What activity over the last year has brought you the most joy, comfort, or energy? And I just dropped the question to chat as well. But please feel free to go ahead and do that. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Ellen and Wendy from Integral Care, who are going to lead us through the next conversation. Thank you so much, Ellen and Wendy.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much, Rita. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to work with you as we prepare for today. As Rita mentioned, I'm Ellen Richards, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Integral Care. And with me today is Wendy Salazar, who is a practice manager for adult behavioral health and child and family services at Integral Care. Wendy has worked in the field of integrated behavioral health for over 11 years, and she specializes in women and children's mental health issues, depression and trauma. And for those that don't know us, Integral Care is a local government agency in Travis County. And for more than 50 years, we've supported adults and children living with mental illness, substance use disorder, and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm excited to be here with all of you today and guide us through this conversation. And Wendy's really our expert that's going to be sharing her experience working with folks across the community. But I thought we'd start off and just join you in the icebreaker. So Wendy, if you would you like to share what your answer to the icebreaker question is that was posted to the group? What's helped you the most over the last year?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to share. So I will start by sharing with you all that I am a mom of 7 children by way of blended family, nonetheless 7. And interestingly, over the course of like 2019 and 2020, I actually graduated from high school 5 of those 7 children. And so that was on top of everything else that was going on, a huge transition in my life. And I realized that a good portion of my time outside of my profession was being mom. So I found myself going, what do I do with myself? And I have a love for all things furry and 4 legs, even feathered and then some. And for a long time coming, I had been wanting to adopt and actually train a therapy dog. So I have since adopted a beautiful golden retriever named Christian. We are almost at the point where he'll be, I'm going to say this crossing my fingers and toes, certified as a therapy dog. So you might hear him in the background, not being very therapeutic if he happens to bark, but that is what I've been doing.
That's so great, Wendy. Thank you for sharing. Those furry pet friends have been so important to so many people during this last couple of years. For me, I started a yoga practice during the pandemic to keep myself sane and healthy. And so I aspire to be Yoga with Adrienne. For anybody that knows her, she lives here in Austin, Texas, and was called the pandemic queen of yoga by the New York Times. But my sister and I encourage each other in our yoga practice. We each started during COVID through text. So when we're in a series, we text each other and let us know how we're doing and keep each other going. So it's been an important thing to really help me manage my stress and all of the things that have happened during the last couple of years. So I appreciate anyone that's willing to share. I know in my team, we try to share the tips and tricks that we've used over the last couple of years to help each other. So as folks have mentioned, the challenges of the last nearly 2 years have really taken the toll on our collective health. And as the people in the community who help everyone else survive and hopefully thrive, it's so essential that you get the support that you need to be well in mind and body. Our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And I think that COVID has really brought that to the forefront for so many. And today we're going to have a conversation about the signs and symptoms of mental health and substance use issues, along with some ideas for how to get help for yourself or someone else. So we'll get the conversation started on these issues and then move to audience questions for about the last 10 minutes. If you do have questions, you can use those tools that Rita mentioned. So you can either type your questions into the chat or use the Slido that she posted in the chat. And we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. So Wendy, let's get started. We've got a lot to cover in a short period of time. So Wendy, if you would, in your experience, what are you seeing as the impacts of the last 2 years, and what are the issues you're seeing people struggling with today?
So Ellen, I want to start by acknowledging that we are all innately wired to experience emotions. And that is just simply a natural part of being human. You know, we encounter situations that can be potentially distressing. And when that happens, we just naturally begin to experience a little bit of emotional imbalance as we're kind of weathering that storm. Now, sometimes these unanticipated events can linger while the dust is settling. For some of us, these situations can be short in duration. For others, it might be a little more longer lasting. You know, some examples to that is, you know, losing employment, maybe struggling with being able to secure new employment, all the way to all of what has happened over the last 2 years. I mean, essentially, these circumstances, when we are in these positions, there are situations such that we just have to ride that wave of change. And that can sometimes have some substantial impact on just our overall emotional well-being and impact on our daily living. And as a result, sometimes we can start to experience situational depression or situational anxiety. And that is that basically we may begin experiencing periods of mood changes until that activating or precipitating event resolves. And then we start to find that emotionally we start to re-experience that state of balance. Now, this is also evident in individuals who may be experiencing seasonal affective disorder. It's a condition in which the shorter days causing a decrease in exposure to sunlight can sometimes lead to a depressive state. And I mention this because seasonal affective disorder tends to present for individuals during the winter months. And seeing as we are in these moments, I just felt it noteworthy and important to mention. But to your question, in my clinical practice, in both the adult and child work that I do, I've definitely seen a rise in depression and anxiety, especially over the last 2 years. There have been several events that have simultaneously occurred with the pandemic, racial reckoning, and now these COVID variants. People have been on a 2-year stretch of emotional unrest.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I definitely relate to that seasonal affective disorder. People can't believe that you can have that in Texas, but you can. And it's definitely makes the winter extra long. So Wendy, sometimes it's hard for someone to know when they need to get help. And can you guide us to understand some of the common symptoms to look for that a person is experiencing a mental health issue?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I would want to stress is that symptoms of emotional distress do not typically come at us all at once. And this is especially important because oftentimes when someone makes the decision to connect to care, they may potentially be at that point where they're really struggling. So if we can encourage individuals to listen to those initial distress signals that our body does send us, we really do have a greater risk at curtailing, mitigating the development of a mental health diagnosis or preventing a mental health crisis altogether. Now, oftentimes these initial distress signals can be can be rather subtle. They can present in a number of different ways, and I'll just mention a few, but this is not by all means it's not at all limited to what I'm going to share. But we can start to experience things as unexplained difficulties with sleep, either sleeping too much, not being able to fall asleep, experiencing interrupted sleep, whereas we're kind of waking up throughout the night for no apparent reason. I can tell you that I started experiencing something very similar. I would like literally get done with work and go, well, I'm just going to get into my pajamas and, wait an hour for dinner, and then I'll start making dinner. And I started to catch that trend in myself. And other changes to kind of look for are changes in appetite, not feeling hungry, only to recognize that you've gone all day without nourishing your body, or the opposite, overeating, eating when you're not hungry, then to wonder, why did I just do that? And we can also begin experiencing just kind of this general sense of low energy that may have an impact on motivation and purpose. We can also experience withdrawal from friends and family that we could arguably say can be linked to that kind of low energy, kind of no motivation. And that ultimately can lead to impacting our productivity at work, our domestic responsibilities. I also want to add that physical symptoms can also begin to surface. And this is why we so often stress the idea behind that body-mind connection, because we can begin to experience physical symptoms such as headaches, unexplained bodily aches and pains, such as kind of that tightening or those pinches in the back that I know I felt, and even things as far as gastrointestinal issues, which more times than not, we'll be more likely to go to the doctor for these physical symptoms, all to find out that there's no like physiological etiology, and that we then start to tie it to the potential of it being emotionally influenced. Now, as these initial symptoms progress, we can then begin to notice a shift in mood, such as increased irritability, being uncharacteristically easily frustrated with events or situations that historically have never been an issue for us, experiencing kind of a general sense of sadness for no apparent reason, then finding ourselves engaging in some negative kind of self-talk. I always say that we all talk to ourselves, and if we deny that, I'll call you a liar, because we all have these conversations. That internal dialogue is so important, and paying attention to that is super, super key. We might start to also experience situations with not attending to our activities of daily living, such as our personal hygiene, again, back to those domestic responsibilities, and just kind of making sure that our professional, personal, and social business is being attended to, because all of these are super healthy activities that we should be attending to and engaging in. We can start to experience uncontrollable worries, interpersonal conflicts with loved ones, friends, or colleagues, and unfortunately, on the more severe end, beginning to experience thoughts of death, dying, self-harm, and suicide.
So there's so much for people to pay attention to. And the important thing is for not only recognizing those possible symptoms that folks might be experiencing, but then what are next steps? So what are some of the strategies that people can use to help themselves if they're having signs of depression, anxiety, or stress, or seeing this in someone else?
Yeah, super good question, Ellen. I can't stress enough on how important it is to learn to listen to our body. It really does let us know when things are just off course. And again, those subtle signs are so very important to recognize, because that really affords us the opportunity to take a very proactive approach in attending to our emotional and physical well-being through self-care. That's why we're here today. And one thing that I would like to recognize is that as a community, we have done an excellent job at really blasting that concept of self-care. And there's a reason for that. We know that through continued efforts of better understanding self-care and research behind that, it demonstrates that the physical and emotional health benefits of self-care are substantial. Now, self-care can look different for people. However, Now, the concept of self-care is ultimately an intentional act of engaging in behavioral activities that elicit that state of mental and physical calm or rejuvenation. Things such as taking a short brisk walk, adopting a golden retriever for therapy, dog, doing things like engaging in diaphragmatic breathing, listening to music, yoga, other forms of meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, just to name a few. And I know that this is nothing new to our attendees today. These are the very same things that we encourage the clients that we serve to do. Now, there may be other activities that people may already be doing, like regularly scheduled physical exercise, like jogging. I think I saw a comment in the chat where someone mentioned jogging and walking. I think there probably was several comments to that nature. Even things like weight training, things that we have already been naturally scheduling and doing for ourselves that can sometimes fall off our radar when mood is a little dippy. And so ultimately, what we want to be doing in this time is to really try and create a lot of intentionality about prescribing that time to engage in those activities for at least 15 to 30 minutes a day. And I say try because it's not uncommon to experience a lack of drive when we are experiencing these dips in mood. And it's so important to not succumb to the lack of that drive that can sometimes happen. And if we are experiencing this lack of drive, we really do need to do it, even if we're not really feeling it in the moment, because in doing so, we really are essentially giving our brain that jumpstart that it is needing to get those naturally producing mood regulating hormones in here.
Yeah, so that is so important to not only know what to do, but then actually set aside time to get it into your really, really busy day. I know lately what I've been doing with the lower light is just taking a little break at lunch and getting outside when it's sunny. So I know I'm getting that exposure to sun and that D3 that I need to help keep my mood elevated. So taking those little snack breaks, as I call them, like to get a little bit of exercise or take the dog out in the yard, something that gets me outside and keeps me moving throughout the day has been really helpful to me. So Wendy, we know that reports indicate that in addition to mental health issues being on the rise, that substance use has increased as well recently. The stress, anxiety, and these other issues are contributing to people using substances to cope. And so I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms that a coping strategy may now be an issue to address. So if you wouldn't mind touching on that issue of substance use.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ellen, what you're describing here is the concept of self-medicating. Self-medicating is the act of engaging or consuming habit-forming substances such as alcohol, illicit substances, prescribed medications, maybe they're prescribed, but just not prescribed to us, or the overuse of prescribed medications prescribed to us to relieve stress or other emotional duress. Now, it is really important to give this a name because in essence, as you mentioned, this is a form of coping. However, it's one that although may bring some initial form of relief, in the long run, the outcome of its effects can certainly be more detrimental due to the high risks of forming dependency and tolerance to the substance in question over time. Meaning that over time, we'll need more of that substance just to be able to experience the relief we initially had when first using. And again, just like those subtle distress signals that our body gives us when we're experiencing these mild symptoms of situational depression and anxiety, using substances can also slowly creep their way into more frequent use, all while us not necessarily taking notice. And therefore, it is so important, again, that intentionality to be very intentional with legal use of any habit-forming substance such as alcohol or prescribed medications to us. And so ensuring this intentionality with paying close attention to the amount of alcohol one is consuming, for example, is going to be incredibly critical. Now, if we typically have been an infrequent drinker, say only on social occasions, but now are trending to consuming after stressful events, and this has not been very typical, we may want to be mindful of these shifts in use so that we can really mitigate and divert and intentionally incorporate some other element of healthier coping. Now, we also want to be paying attention to how our use is impacting what I endearingly refer to as our 3 L's, our ability to live, laugh, and love. And that is really our use. Is it interfering with our functioning at work? Is it interfering with our family? Is it interfering with our social engagements and our overall life? Now, these may be indicators that we may need to be exploring other alternatives, or maybe even need to be seeking professional help if we're starting to recognize these things. And I want to also add that sometimes that insight, even though we are in the helping field, may not necessarily be present. And so oftentimes other family members may be reaching out and letting us know what they're seeing.
Yeah, and Wendy, I think that's so important. I think in living where we do, particularly Austin kind of has that, that sort of a really vibrant culture, and a lot of it tends to center around dining out or going to local bars or things like that. And even though some of that's been curtailed during COVID, I think that oftentimes can contribute to that sense, to the ability to lose that sense of what's appropriate at times in terms of using. So it is, I think, important to be mindful of the environment we live in and what the messages are that we are getting on a daily basis. So we've talked a little bit about tips and tools, and but sometimes folks need additional support. So how do we know when it's time to reach out for professional help? And to let everybody know, we will be sharing information at the end with resources, and and I think they'll be putting this out to attendees as well, so that if you need additional resources or support for yourself or someone else, that we will be providing those. So Wendy, when is it time to reach out for professional help?
Yeah, so I want to just also start by recognizing that our community has really rallied together to actively promote that body-mind connection. And over the course of time, we have worked vigorously at breaking the silence that stigma has caused, because we are essentially better understanding how both our physical and emotional well-being are interconnected. And as a result, we have come together at building opportunities to ensure community awareness, professional awareness, such as campaigns and talks as these ones. And it allows us to provide that continued education, keeping the topic alive and present, not just to those that we serve, but to us as well as professionals in the helping field. We too are humans, Ellen, and we too are in need of the very same self-help and self-care as those that we care for and support. And, with that being said, again, we have really done an excellent job at rallying together to bring continued support to both our community and our helping professionals by increasing access to emotional health support and breaking down those walls of stigma. Now, especially over the last 2 years, because ultimately, we are in this fight together. And all that to say, it is so important to really give ourselves that time for self-reflection, that time to learn to listen and give our body what it's asking for in that very intentional and proactive manner. And really, if we begin to notice these signs and symptoms that we've talked about today, and if you're not already doing it, start to intentionally prescribe that time for yourself. If symptoms get worse, or if other things are presenting for you that are of concern, explore your resources. This is so incredibly important, because in caring for ourselves, we are also able to continue the work that we are doing. As professionals in the helping field, we should really be mirroring the very things we are encouraging our clients to do. Again, after all, we are in this together. The very resources that we may be encouraging our clients to access are just as helpful to us. Programs such as NAMI, the Trevor Project, our very own local mental health authority, Integral Care, props. These are just a few really important contact points that can offer a wealth of support. Now, even though we are professionals in the helping field, we too, again, need to recognize that we may need a little bit of support from time to time. And we too can experience some of those emotional internal discords about even accessing these resources. Now, I can tell you this because now I'm coming to you with lived experience. I have had moments in the last 2 years where I have had to support a loved one who was experiencing some significant emotional health needs. And it was not easy by any stretch of the imagination for me to pick up that phone and ask for help. Now, I cannot stress enough how having done so was not only the hardest thing to do, but it was the best thing I did. So I would strongly encourage anyone experiencing any need to this nature to, like the Nike commercial says, just do it. We never have anything to lose, but rather so much to gain for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for those that we essentially care for professionally.
Wendy, thank you so much. I mean, it's, I think, so important for folks to hear that even though you're out there doing this amazing counseling work with others, that you too are seeking that help, given the challenges that you've faced personally over the last couple of years. And so thank you for being willing to share that with us. I want to remind folks as we get towards the end of this portion, we are going to be taking questions. So if you'd like to use the chat or the Slido to share any questions that you might have, we'll be moving towards those at the end of this conversation. So Wendy, we definitely want to be sure we're taking care of ourselves, but sometimes there might be a situation where there's someone else. So like in your life, you've been working to support someone else. What about having those conversations with someone else who you may think needs help? Do you have any suggestions for how to approach that hard conversation?
Yeah, I definitely do. So as I mentioned today, I'm not just coming to you as a fellow colleague in the helping profession. I'm also coming to you as an individual with lived experience. I can say that the venture of my experience was nothing short of overwhelming. It was an emotional roller coaster. Having gone through the process of supporting my loved one when they were experiencing their emotional health decline, I really had to apply every bit of what I have shared with you all today. Self-care, yep, I did it. Making sure I got out of those jammies, making sure I didn't get into the jammies to begin with. Reaching out to my local mental health authority, the very same agency who I'm employed with. Yeah, I did it. And when I say I did it, I mean, I did it a lot. Self-monitoring my own emotional responses to all that was going on, absolutely. And I can say that even though it comes naturally to discuss these very things with the clients that we serve, it was not easy for me to take that initial step. So one of the biggest challenges in supporting a loved one experiencing an emotional health decline was really finding that sweet spot between supporting them while taking care of yourself. And when I say self, it could be you in particular, maybe you in the context of your family, whatever and however it is that you define that. And even more so, how not just initially how to approach the conversation with that loved one, but to know that we oftentimes have to repeatedly reach out and continue to engage. I mentioned a little bit back about just kind of sometimes that lack of insight. So when we talk about engaging and you being the person reaching out, there's a lot of time invested in the continual extending of invitation to talk about what's going on. And I can't stress how important that is. And when I say repeat it, I mean like fly on fruit persistence. So then how do we do that, right? Coming to them as a concerned loved one, it's important to just invite them to that conversation about these concerns. Opening statements such as, hey, it's been a while, it's been over a week, just wanting to check in. We usually check in every week. I miss those check-ins. I'm kind of needing that time. Can we connect? Just kind of continue these very just connected, safe, hey, this is for both of us kind of check-ins and invitations. Those are so important to try to even practice doing. Things like, what you've been up to, just something simple like that. We don't have to come at them with, well, hey, it's been over a month since we talked. We can just keep it very simple just to get them to engage. Something as simple as that really can lend itself to the opportunity to really expand on what's going on and then to start diving in a little bit more about concerns. Now, these initial attempts may not always lend themselves to those immediate engaging conversations. As a matter of fact, I would want to set some realistic expectations. I know for me, it wasn't. It was several months in the work, several months in the process, lots of periods of incredible frustration for myself, for other loved ones who were also trying to be supportive. So again, just kind of that self-check is so important, but continuing to reach out. Now, and I should say that at any time when you do successfully connect, just let them know that you're there for them and that you genuinely care and that you want to be there of support. And, if you feel like you're running out of options or things to say, I know I did, reach out to those community resources. Sometimes just having that outlet to process at least what I was feeling and being able to kind of just talk out loud, hear myself say these things really lent themselves for me to just kind of come up with new and creative ways to reframe, rephrase, re-ask similar questions that I had in previous attempts before.
Thank you, Wendy. That is so important. I know, whether it's a colleague, someone you supervise, a family member, I think really just being willing to let them know that you see them and care about them is so important to making that connection, keeping that connection so that there is that chance to reach out for help or to engage them to reach out for help. So that's the end of our formal conversation. And so we wanted to give folks an opportunity to ask questions. If you want to put those in the chat or again, send them to Rita in the Slido and she can pass them along to us. We could do our best to answer any questions that folks have to further help. And again, we will be sharing those resources with everybody at the end of this presentation. So looks like there's a question here. So thanks for the presentation. Ways that an organization can institute benefits or culture that supports us. They're sharing something here, something that may be relevant. So that, thanks, Jeanette. That is such a critical issue, right? How our organizations are doing in terms of supporting employees to get the help they need, to offer support, whether it's, employee assistance programs, things like that, and whether you have a supportive culture that offers flexibility, things like that. So thanks for sharing that. So here's a question, tips for talking to your employer if you need flexibility or support related to mental health. So Wendy, do you have any thoughts on that?
I absolutely do. Again, I'm just going to stress how initiating those conversations were not at all easy, but I just simply said, hey, can we check in? I know that every entity, every organization kind of handles kind of that supervision, supervisor relationship a little bit differently, but I can tell you that my organization has and does a lot of intentional check-ins with their staff and their clinicians. So I just already and organically had space allocated with my supervisor where I would check in with them every 2 weeks. And I just simply said one day, hey, I need you to hear this. I need you to know this. And I shared with them what my intentions were on how to navigate the balance of the work that I knew I needed to stay committed to, while also ensuring that I could, intentionally set that space for my loved one. And, I had no problems navigating that issue. My supervisor was very supportive. I've been doing talks like these for a couple of years, give or take now. And even when I've had to, oh my gosh, got to shift gears, I got to take care of something, I've had coworkers say, yep, I'm on it. I got your back. We've got this. And that gets reciprocated in times where other individuals that I'm working alongside with is unable to do these things. So just kind of having that in my corner approach, and also being in corners for those colleagues and other individuals that are in my working environment was so pivotal and key.
Yeah, I think, Wendy, another thing is potentially there's been a lot of articles on the issues related to workforce and mental health, and the one that I took to my supervisor was the one on languishing that was in the New York Times. So I think sometimes that's helpful to bring those, bring the research, bring the articles and say, hey, this is really an issue in the community, and then kind of building that support for not only yourself, but the rest of the workforce. So there's another possible approach. So another question that's come in, so when someone becomes angry when we share our concerns with them, is there anything you recommend we do or don't do in response and to support that person? How do we check ourselves to make sure we are not misinterpreting signs?
Yeah, and that is a very tricky and fine line to navigate, and a super important question to ask. I'm a fully licensed clinical mental health professional, and I'll share with you that I did experience a moment where I misaligned this push away as, okay, I need to allow space for, oh, this was more than that. What I'm going to share with you is that when in doubt, reach out. Again, this is more lived experience and more intuitive that I'm sharing with you, more kind of anecdotal from my experience, but I had this aching feeling and I said, nope, I'm not going to just let this lie. And I did reach out for help, and we got the help that was needed for that loved one. So when in doubt, just reach out.
Yeah, and I think that just reiterating that point, that monitoring your own self and being in the place that, trying to get yourself in a place where you can have those conversations is an important piece of that too, right? So just making sure you're in the best place possible, having your own techniques down to calm yourself, keep yourself in as good a place as possible as you're having those conversations.
If I may add, just one more thing that I think is important to just kind of stress is it's so important not to take things personally, because those exchanges can get a little bit bitter. Recognizing that your loved one or whomever it is that you're approaching is just not in a good headspace, and keeping that present for yourself can help with compartmentalizing some of those not so very nice exchanges that can be given whenever that loved one is not wanting to engage. Another thing I want to just stress is this, if it can be, should be a team effort. So if there's another family member, loved one that you can tag team with, I know I had that, we would do that. I would literally say, I'm tapping out, you're in, or that was reciprocated. whenever it was on that other end with that other loved one. So having a plan is going to be important on how you might want to navigate that, but definitely keeping in mind that we should not, as best as we can, take it personally.
That's right. It's not always about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So another thought about something, let's see, how we can create space in the workplace to have brave conversations about mental health. So I'll start on this, and Wendy, if you have anything to add, you know, depending on your employer, I think, you know, if there are any kind of employee groups, or if you have team meetings where in your smaller groups, using those opportunities to start having these conversations, even if it's not about yourself, but about just what you're seeing in the community, what you're hearing. I think opening up in kind of like a way to say, hey, I'm really seeing this across the community, or I'm reading all these articles about mental health in the workplace. What are we doing as an organization? Might be a way to start that dialogue and get folks talking about it, either in kind of smaller team meetings, or if you have any kind of like employee council or things like that. Wendy, do you have any thoughts about having those conversations? And then we'll be wrapping up.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I love everything that you just shared, Ellen. That's exactly on point. But sometimes we are the ones that might be recognizing that these conversations need to happen, and kind of figuring out for ourselves where we feel comfortable engaging in those conversations.
Right.
So maybe it's not necessarily to start in this group format. Maybe it's a hey, supervisor, do you think we can check in really quickly? I would love to share these ideas with you, see what we might be able to do with them, what we could potentially bring to the table. I'll tell you that I work with a wonderful organization, and a lot of very intentional, proactive work is happening all the time in our agency. But if we are the ones that are identifying that need, finding for yourself what feels comfortable in delivering and conveying that information as far as space and safe space is concerned, would be something that I would encourage folks to kind of reflect on, explore, and then engage.
That's great, Wendy. Thank you so much. Yeah, finding that safe place, right, to start those conversations, whether it's with a supervisor, with a colleague, you know, with a couple of colleagues, and maybe building some support for having those conversations. So I know there's another question, we can't get to it. I need to pitch it back to Rita so that y'all can transition to this other important activity. But I just want to thank Wendy and thank all of you for being with us today. Such important conversations that we're having. And I just want to encourage everyone to take care of themselves and do the things that you need to do to stay healthy and well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Wendy and Ellen, both for sharing this important information with us and being able to be here for our community so we can support others as well. This is really important and valuable information. And we all are here together today. And we wanted to remind you, if you have other resources, please feel free to start dropping them in chat. We're going to do the same, especially during this transition time. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. So we're going to come back about 12:05 for a personal wellness activity with Robin and Bree from YWCA Greater Austin. And so that'll be the next portion of our activities today together. Again, we're here to be together. Thank you so much, Wendy and Ellen, for everything you've shared with us today and taking the time. And we're going to practice turning our cameras off and our mics off so that everyone can take a break. Feel free to run to the restroom, whatever you need to do, get a drink. And if you need to check email, things like that, or move to another meeting, we also want to make sure you feel like you can leave this conversation too. We are going to also stop recording